I found this really old shirt in my wardrobe that I designed when I was like 15 years old, and look, it's got Sherlock's face on the one side and John's face on the other, so this is the in-character outfit we're going with today. Hello everyone, my name is John, I'm the geeky fanboy, and oh boy, this video was supposed to come out last week. I had a lot of stuff to do last week. I was quite busy with, stuff for university. Then I got ill over the weekend, but I also got vaccinated, so that's good. Which is why this video is a little bit late. This was supposed to come out on the 25th, because the 25th of July is the official anniversary of BBC Sherlock. That was when, in 2010, the first episode, A Study in Pink, came out, which is why today's Baker Street review is going to be the very first episode of BBC Sherlock. We're gonna watch Study in Pink, or at least I'm gonna watch it, and we'll see how the BBC lets me put footage of the episode in this video, because we all know the BBC and copyright, not best friends. But we'll see. You definitely hear my opinions on the episode. So I don't even really want to say too much. So this episode is now 11 years old. Wow. So I was 13 years old when I watched this. I watched it the day it aired for the first time. And I immediately fell in love with it. Like, at the time, I was like getting into Sherlock Holmes adaptations. I had already read a couple of stories. I had seen the Robert Downey Jr. movies, which like got me into Sherlock Holmes. And then shortly after that, that BBC series got announced, and I was super excited because I was like, oh, this looks interesting, and ooh, modern day. Okay, let's see how they handle it. And I saw these two men, I thought, oh, they look perfect together. Like, casting-wise, it looked really good to me. And then I watched Study in Pink, and I absolutely loved it. I remember sitting on the edge of my seat by the end of the episode. You'll see why, but I think it's not that big of a surprise. So yeah, there are definitely going to be spoilers. Like I said, 11 years old. And I already mentioned this in my ranking of all the episodes for BBC Sherlock, that I think Study in Pink is a very good first episode. Like, usually with TV shows of any kind, the first episode is usually not the best. It's not the strongest, because it's very hard to like introduce all of your cool ideas and all of your interesting characters right in a first episode. Because usually, if you start a series off, you have to do like a lot of establishing like who are the characters, like what is the setting, but you also have to like sort of tell an interesting story at the same time without it becoming too much of just like exposition. And I think Study in Pink, at the time I watched it, I thought did a fantastic job of introducing us to, reintroducing us to Sherlock Holmes and John Watson. So I have good memories of this episode. It has been a while since I've seen this episode. I think I watched it 1 year ago. The last time I saw it, not sure. But this is probably the episode I've watched the most, apart from maybe the Reichenbach Fall episode. But yeah, this is definitely the one I can talk along to almost the entire 90 minutes. I can quote everything that's going on. Even I remember sitting down in front of the TV, in front of my DVD player when I was 14 years old, and trying to get down all of the deductions so I was able to speak them along with the characters. And they kind of got stuck in my mind, because apparently that's the kind of valuable information I keep over the years. So there you go. But yeah, that's it so much for the introduction. I mean, you all know the rest. It's Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock Holmes, who I would argue to this day is one of the best castings for Sherlock Holmes you could probably have. Then we also have Martin Freeman, naturally, as John Watson. Fantastic. I didn't know either of the actors, really, before watching Sherlock. I think I'd maybe heard of Benedict Cumberbatch or like seen him somewhere, maybe, but I wasn't really aware of any of the actors or the producers or the writers involved in this. So I really only got to know like Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat from Sherlock, and then I got into Doctor Who later. So I was like, oh, okay, the same people who made Sherlock, so that's cool. And this is also why I think Moffat and Gatiss still are strong in their writing. So I'm kind of going back into this with a feeling of, yeah, this is going to be fun. This is going to be a good introductory episode. But we'll see how fondly I actually remember this episode while watching it. So I'm gonna go and watch the episode right now. Oh, poor Watson. You know what, just like in the very first note, imagine if they totally went with like PTSD broken Watson, how interesting that would be. I'm pretty sure there may be some versions out there that do this. I remember that in the book review I did for like the Cthulhu Sherlock book, Watson has like kind of a PTSD thing, but because of Cthulhu stuff. But imagine, like, they don't really do anything with it in this, like, not seriously, but imagine, I think that would be actually quite interesting, like, having Watson come back from the war and have, like, actual, like, issues that become a storyline for him. Someone get on that. I think that would be interesting.
Nothing happens to me.
Cue the intro music! Yes! Ah, God, I love that intro music so much.
Was found late last night on a building site.
Oh, Lestrade, look at him.
Preliminary investigation suggests that this was
Graves,
suicide.
gotta love him.
We can confirm that the
Stamford. Mike Stamford, we were bots together.
Oh, I hate that tie so much. Look at Stamford's tie. Oh.
I heard you were abroad somewhere getting shot at. What happened?
Oh, neat little detail. I remember that the cops they're holding are from the Criterion, and I think in the pilot even go to like the actual Criterion bar or restaurant, which is a reference to the original canon where they do go to the actual Criterion. So I think it's either they kind of still keep this with like putting it on like the cup. That's cute.
Well, you're the second person to say that to me today.
Who's the first?
This guy. Oh, look at him.
Afghanistan or Iraq?
Sorry?
Which was it, Afghanistan or Iraq?
I just love this whole first conversation. It's close to what happens in the actual book, like Sherlock being like, I perceive you've just recently returned from Afghanistan or something like that, and John just being like, how the bloody hell does he know about that? I like that. I think this whole like first meeting between the two is really close to what happens in the actual book, like with Stamford and Watson going to the hospital and Sherlock doing some chemistry experiments. It's all very close, and I love how it's updated because it just works, doesn't it? And I like that Sherlock gets to be like an actual proper chemist in this adaptation. It's just a really good, strong first impression, I think.
The name's Sherlock Holmes and the address is 221B Baker Street.
Oh,
Afternoon.
how could you watch that and not think, yes, this is Sherlock Holmes? I just think Benedict Cumberbatch is great casting, especially for like the modern day adaptation. Like, he's got the looks, he's got the charisma. So good, so good. I've been there. For the record, I've been at that place, at that street. It looks pretty close to the actual Baker Street. I think it's just like a couple blocks away from 221B Baker Street. It's North Gower Street, I think, and standing there is super weird, but also so much fun. It's been a couple of years since I've been there, but it's just like seeing it now and realizing that I've actually been there a couple of years ago. I'm just all up in the nostalgia at the moment, so.
So this is
Well, obviously I can straighten things up a bit.
For the record, I absolutely adore the design of this Baker Street. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's in a way similar to the actual 221B, or at least the museum with like the fireplace and 2 armchairs in front of it, and you have like the one wall with like all the windows. I like it. It's a good design. I love the wallpaper, for the record. I absolutely adore the wallpaper, and just in general the design. I think the set design is really good. That it's definitely messy, but it has this sense of like organized mess, which I always imagined Sherlock to be like. Like he himself looks like very cleaned up, but if you like visit him at his flat, everything looks chaotic. But he knows precisely where everything is, and Watson isn't even like really allowed to put stuff anywhere. It's mostly just Sherlock stuff, which is kind of the joke here. But I like it, and I think they did a really good job with like the set design, with because it definitely is still like a Victorian flat. It, like I said, North Gower Street, where the film designer, this is like I said, but it's all still very much in the style in this Victorian style that the original Baker Street is in, with like the fireplace and just the general design of the flat and of the house. So I think it works very well to how they sort of combine like the Victorian styles with the more modern ideas.
And I can read your military career in your face and your leg and your brother's drinking habits and your mobile phone.
How?
Again, I like how similar this is to the actual story, how much they stick to it, Stardy and Scarlet, where, you know, Watson comes down to breakfast and he reads this article in a newspaper or something, which is about the science of deduction, and he reads it with Sherlock sitting right next to him, mind you, and Watson is like, oh, absolute rubbish. I don't know who this man is who wrote this, but it sounds like absolute bollocks. And Sherlock is like, I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm the man who wrote that article. So it's like, what? But how? And then Sherlock, like, I think even proceeds to like explain his deductions, and even does like a really cool, fancy deduction. Again, and I love how plus this thing is, and naturally this is not as huge as like the whole build up of Watson moving in and trying to find out what Sherlock actually does, as it is in the original novel. But they're touching up on it just enough so that as a reader of the book, you're like, oh, this is actually from that part of the story, or that's from this part of the novel. And I like it. They're sticking close to it, but giving it their own twist.
Psychosomatic, of course, you've got a therapist. Then there's your brother. Your phone, it's expensive, email-enabled MP3 player. Are you looking for a flat share? You won't waste money on this. It's a gift then.
Aren't you going to put one on?
Ruin that nice coat.
So where
How
are we?
dare you? Even though, for the record, in the original pilot episode, which is adorable, by the way, if you haven't seen it, you really should, Sherlock puts one on, and it looks so ridiculously cute, I think. In general, the whole 60-minute pilot episode is ridiculously adorable in a certain way. I don't know, I like it. This is where the cool visuals come in, where we see what Sherlock is actually thinking. And I think it works so well, and I like how they add like some of the noises go along with the visuals. I know it's very fancy, a lot of people make fun of it, but I like it, it works.
Rache, German for revenge. She could be trying to tell us
Yes,
something.
thank you for your input.
So she's German.
Of course she's not. She's from out of town, though.
Again, this is something where they reference the original canon, but like they turn it around. Because here it's Rachel instead of Rache, whereas in the book it's definitely Rache, and people are thinking, oh, we're looking for a lady called Rachel, but Sherlock is like, yeah, no, it's about revenge. And I actually like that initially, that they sort of turned it around, because I want to say in the book it made more sense for the guy to write it down in German, but I'm not sure if it did. Maybe it's because he's from America, I thought, or something like that. It had to do something with like a weird Mormon American storyline. But I don't know, it always made more sense to me that in the book, in Victorian times, they would write something down in like a different language, like maybe French or German. And in the modern day adaptation wouldn't maybe work as well. So I actually kind of, I think it's actually kind of good that they went with that it's Rachel instead of Rache.
Hello?
There is a security camera.
Oh, we all know who that is.
Do you see it?
I know they're trying to play it off as like, ooh, maybe it's Moriarty. I'll be honest, I never thought that was gonna be Moriarty. I just thought, who the hell is that weird dude? What are you doing here? I know this is something they added from like the pilot, because the pilot was originally 60 minutes long, and then the BBC said, cool, we like it, but how about you make it 90 minutes long? And then they added this whole Mycroft subplot, which is cute, even though it doesn't really go with anything else that happens in the episode. But why is Mycroft so weirdly creepy? I know he hasn't appeared yet, but we'll see.
If you were to ask him, he'd probably say his arch enemy.
This whole thing is just so for the audience, so we can think, oh my god, it's Moriarty. It's kind of dumb if you think about it, because why would Sherlock be like, I despise my brother, I think he's my arch enemy because we don't get along. I think they took inspiration from The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, because this Mycroft's very similar to the one in that, played by Christopher Lee. I know they're kind of going for that, but it's never really how I imagined their relationship to be like. I know that they're not very like super mega super close in the books, but there's definitely not this kind of antagonism between them of being like, oh, we're arch enemies. It's really just a teasing line for the audience to be like, oh, Moriarty, which is dumb. But I guess it's here, so let's just roll with it.
You tell me.
What I like about this whole conversation is that you really see what kind of man Watson is, like how strong of character he is, and how brave and loyal he eventually like really turns out to be towards Sherlock. And I like how Watson's like a proper character in this, and he really gets to shine in this, and he's arguably he's definitely one of the main characters, but you know that the show switches its focus very much on Sherlock in later episodes. But I love how Watson, especially like in this very first episode, is very much our main character. We get to see what he's like and what he goes through as he gets to know Sherlock, and I like to really get to see what kind of man he is in this conversation.
Bad news for brain work.
It's good news for breathing.
Ugh, breathing. Breathing's boring.
Is that 3 patches?
It's a 3-patch problem.
Reference.
So obviously he felt compelled to get rid of it the moment he noticed he still had it. Wouldn't have taken him more than 5 minutes to realise his mistake. I checked every backstory.
I don't think this kind of deduction would work nowadays, being like, oh, would draw attention to yourselves because it's a man with a pink suitcase. Heck, I think even I have a pink suitcase somewhere, I think. So I don't think that deduction would work nowadays. This is very much 2010. I don't think that would fly nowadays. That would work.
You don't have a girlfriend then?
Girlfriend? No, not really my area.
Do you have a boyfriend? Which is fine, by the way.
I know it's fine.
You're unattached, like me.
This whole conversation. I know. I think this is something I'll have to come back to someday. Like this whole conversation is like the first instance of, the gay joke that they're a couple and everything. But you know what? It's kind of funny. To this day, I think this is kind of funny. Because, of course, they would have this conversation, but wouldn't they? Especially in a contemporary setting, you would have this kind of conversation. Because I can kind of understand why people would assume that maybe they're a couple in 2010. Why wouldn't you? I don't know. I just think it's I don't know. I can't help that. I like that. I think it's fun that they have this kind of conversation. I know it gets a bit exaggerated as the series goes on, but just like for this episode, I don't know. I think it's cute that they put this in there, and I think it's very appropriate to have this kind of conversation for a 2010 setting, and I think it's kind of funny. So
seriously, this guy, a junkie. Have you met him?
John.
I'm pretty sure you could search this flat all day. You wouldn't find anything you could call recreation.
John, you probably want to shut up now.
Yeah, but come on.
I love this so much. When I saw this for the first time, I was like, oh, okay, we actually do get mentioned of Sherlock having a drug habit or having had a drug habit at some point, because I absolutely adore when adaptations do that. I love that they went there, and I adore even more the fact that they went with this further down the line. It's like one of the few very good things I think in the later episodes of the show. But I like that they already sort of included here as a history he's had. It serves as more of a reference in this first episode, but I like it. It is sort of set up for later episodes, you could say. Even though I think it initially just served as like a reference, but it works, and I'm thankful I put it in here.
We found it in the hands of our favourite psychopath.
I'm not a psychopath, Anderson. I'm a high-functioning sociopath. Do your research.
And to this day, I somewhere in the depths of my wardrobe, I have a way too small now T-shirt with that quote on it. Because like so many people, I was like, "Oh, that's a good line. That sounds cool. It sounds badass." Even though at the time I had no idea what it actually means, because I had no idea what really makes a psychopath or a sociopath. What's the difference? I had no idea, and I'm pretty sure there were a bunch of like psychological analyses out there trying to figure out if Sherlock is a psychopath or a sociopath. I don't really think he qualifies for. I'm definitely not a psychopath, and I don't even think sociopath. I would argue that the Sherlock in this version is less well socially adjusted, or however you want to put that, than the one in the books. But even so, I don't think Sherlock qualifies for a sociopath. He really doesn't. Again, he is socially awkward, but that's about it. I don't really think he can diagnose Sherlock with being like a sociopath, at least of all a psychopath. So I don't really think that works. But yeah, somewhere I still got that T-shirt because I thought it's a cool line. Oh, I got this one poster here on this wall that even has the same line on it. So there you go. It worked as a brilliant tagline for the show.
If you'd been murdered in your very last few seconds, what would you say?
Please, God, let me live.
Use your imagination.
I don't have to.
I think this line has so much significance if you think about it. Like, it really makes a point out of showing Watson has been to blimmin' war. He was in Afghanistan. He was so close to death multiple times. Back then, it was dangerous. It's arguably maybe even more dangerous now. And I don't know, I just think that gets overlooked. Or this line gets overlooked way too much because there's such heavy implications, I think. And I wish they would have, well, like in general, they would like include more of like Watson's past and his military history and how war actually affected him as a person, which comes back to this whole PTSD thing that I talked about earlier at the beginning of the episode. Like you get hints like that, and you think, oh, this is cool, and this is interesting character building, but then it it doesn't really go anywhere, which is a shame. To this day, this is one of my favorite reveals because like, not just in this episode, but also in the book, that it turns out to be like a cabbie, or I don't know what you want to call it in the original version, like someone drives the coach, the carriage, the hansom. Because that makes so much sense. Like even back then, like in the original stories alone, like Holmes and Watson get on so many like hansoms and coaches and carriages, just driven by random people. You have no idea who they are, and you just get on and hope they get you where you want to be. Even now, and I think it's so clever. It's such a good story, like plot. I think a character reveal, which naturally so Arthur Conan Doyle came up with originally. Because like so much, as long as you have something like a car service, a driving service, you will always have like cabbies or something similar to cabbies, which is someone you initially just trust because it's their job, it's what you do. You don't even really think about it. You don't really think that they're even there. And I think there's so many people in our lives who have those kinds of occupations that you interact with maybe on a daily basis, depending on what you do in your day-to-day life, and you don't even think about them, and they could turn out to be I can't personally. I don't know. I just like that as a twist because it makes sense. It just makes so much sense.
If you call the coppers now, I won't run. I'll sit quiet and they can take me down, I promise.
Why?
Because you're not going to do that.
I might not.
Well, you didn't do it in the original story. This is kind of what I think is a bit of is a bit dumb, admittedly, in this adaptation. Like Sherlock goes with him and gets talked into this whole mind game, and he's about to maybe even kill himself with the pills. He didn't do that in the original story. In the original story, he like trapped the cabbie while I think Watson and Lestrade were there, and then they just arrested him. And then we get this whole story about why Jefferson Hope did what he did, and then he gets arrested. And that's it, case closed. And Sherlock never lets him get talked into this kind of stuff, which is where they heavily deviate from the original story. Which, granted, at the time, I watched this episode for the first time, it really got to me. I was really into it because it seemed like exciting and thrilling, but now in hindsight, kind of dumb, just a little bit.
Should we talk?
The thing is, we all know he's not gonna die. It's the first blimmin' episodes, and this... Actually, if you think about it from the narrative standpoint, this makes no sense. Why would you put this in here? This would make sense maybe as a series finale, or like as an episode 3 finale. But this is the first episode. We all know he's not gonna die, because we know that at least 2 more episodes in series 1, so... Naturally, we all know this is not gonna go wrong. So, why is this even here, if you think about it? I know they kind of have this almost the same conversation in the pilot episode as well, which actually takes place at Baker Street, I think. But even so, I know tension, and we have to up the ante, as they say, and get up the excitement. But if you think about it, actually, it doesn't make any sense because we all know he's not gonna die. Even though, and I'm gonna come back to that, I did feel different about that back when I watched it for the first time.
Not a lot of money in driving cabs.
Or serial killing.
You'd be surprised.
Surprise me.
I have a sponsor.
Okay, so this is where I've been listening to this whole conversation and thinking, oh god, this is so stupid. And completely different from what happens in the original. Naturally, what happens in the original is something you could not do nowadays. It's about murderous Mormons in America killing Jefferson Hope's girlfriend or something like that. And I think he only killed like 1 or 2 men. And the body they find Austin Guards is responsible for him not being able to not being able to marry his girlfriend or something like that. It's been a while since I read the book. Naturally, I get why they couldn't do that in the adaptation, being like, it's murderous Mormons. That wouldn't work. But they band over backwards to make this fit in with their whole Moriarty storyline, which I talked about before, that they rely too much on Moriarty. They introduced it way too early. I think this would have... I don't know, they could have somehow still made this about Jefferson Hope not like losing his girlfriend and he takes revenge out on the people. Just don't make it about Mormons. Just do something else. You can still have love and revenge for his girl. That's the most cliche stereotypical motive you could have. You can still use it. Like it worked. It kind of worked back then. It would definitely work now. But no, it has to be about Moriarty, who somehow sponsors this man and gives him money for killing people, even though I'm not quite sure how that works as a business. But sure, it's happening. It's a thing. It's a thing that I don't understand.
But what's the point of being clever if you can't prove it? Still the addict.
This right here. This right here is what got me to the edge of my seat back when I watched this for the first time when I was 13 years old. I was like sitting, not even on my chair anymore, staring at the screen, being like, Sherlock, you're such an idiot, stop doing what are you doing? Stop it, don't do it. They really had me there when I watched this for the first time. So I know now in hindsight, like, that naturally he's not gonna die. Why would he? But they have me. Admittedly, they had me the first time I saw this, because I was, at that point, I was super invested into what was going on. I really did care for this version of Sherlock Holmes. So in that regard, they did a really good job to like actually make you care for the character at that point. Just wanted to put that out there, just to sort of show that back when this aired for the first time, it had quite the effect, at least on me, and it was very effective in storytelling and what it was doing. And the music also does a lot of the heavy lifting here. It's absolutely brilliant. And I love how Watson himself is also involved in now the finale, as we see that he's about to rescue Sherlock. And that even though this is not really close to like the characterization of Sherlock in the books, that this definitely shows what Sherlock in this series is going to be like, the thrill seeker, the one who plays the game even though he knows that it might get him killed. They do good character work because this sets up Sherlock's character for a large part of the series, definitely. And yeah, naturally, like I said, you can argue this is not what Sherlock Holmes is like at all in the book, and this is not what happens in the original Study in Scarlet. But it is very effective as in having the characterization for this version of Sherlock Holmes. That's what I would say.
The name!
And this is where 13-year-old me jumped off the chair and ran around the room screaming. Because I couldn't believe that they did that. I mean, Sherlock is, wow, such a sadistic twat in this. Unbelievable. Would never happen in the original. Never. Never, ever. And then they brought out Moriarty at the very end here. Which absolutely got to me. Back in the day. Again, effective. But again, in hindsight, I would say way too early of an introduction for Moriarty. And it would have worked better if they had just had this be like a one-off serial killer that served as an introductory case in this first episode. But it certainly is, as it will be in many of the future episodes of Sherlock, a tease to have Moriarty there. So it sort of works as a kind of cliffhanger or like teaser for future episodes.
I didn't find until I was in immediate danger, though. It's a strong moral principle. You're looking for a man probably with a history of military service and nerves of steel.
I love this little realization here.
You did get shot, though. Sorry? In Afghanistan, there was an actual wound.
Oh, yeah, the shoulder.
Shoulder, I thought so.
No, you didn't.
The left one.
Lucky guess.
This is, I think, actually quite smart why they did that, since in the books, as we all know, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle not great with always being in line with what he wrote in previous stories. And we all know consistency is not his forte, as they say, which is why in some of the stories Watson's more like wound is in the leg and sometimes it's in the shoulder. And I think actually that is in a cute way to include, say that they say, okay, he did get shot in the shoulder, but they still give him like the wound in his leg, which is psychosomatic, which they more or less get rid of now by the end of this episode. So it's cute that they at least address this inconsistency from the original stories.
Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson.
Yeah, look at them. Look at them. Dynamic duo. Oh, they do look good together. Just like... It's good. And that's it. I rewatched A Study in Pink. Oh boy, so much nostalgia. 11 years old. So many good things in this. I think still this is one of the strongest episodes of BBC Sherlock. I mentioned it in the introduction. I think it's a strong case. It's a good adaptation, I think, of A Study in Scarlet. It does a lot of things right. It also does a couple of things wrong. We're going to come back to that. But overall, I think this is a very strong introductory episode because it shows you what the characterizations for Watson and Holmes are going to be like in this. It adapts the very first canonical story, which makes sense. But it changes it enough so that it keeps you on your toes if you're familiar with the original story. And I think it's good. I like that we start off with Watson, and that it starts off with him coming home from Afghanistan. And I wish they would actually have an adaptation where it's all about like Watson and how the military service like influenced him over the years, especially like nowadays with like, they hint at this with like his therapist, that he maybe has some kind of PTSD going on, which we maybe don't know about. Like it's hinted at, but they never really do anything with it, and it kind of gets thrown out the window by the end of this episode, and it doesn't really come back. But I wish they had run with that a bit more, because I think they have a very strong characterization of Watson, especially in this first episode. But imagine if they had gone with that. It's about Watson coming home from Afghanistan. He needs to readjust to civilian life, and he manages to do that with the help of Sherlock and solving these cases. He's sort of able to balance, you know, this fear of violence and this fear of danger, but that at the same time, what they play a lot with in this adaptation, also in this episode, that Watson is still also kind of weirdly attracted to danger or like solving cases and stuff like that. I bet there's probably somewhere an adaptation where they go with, you know, Watson, PTSD, war-ridden, like war hero kind of thing. I don't know. I just think that would actually be a very interesting characterization for him. And they only hint at it, and they play with it, especially like with the psychosomatic limp he's got going on and the trauma in his hand. But it gets thrown out the window by the end of the episode, and it's not really a thing as the story goes on. Like they kind of play with it in future episodes where it's like Watson's always seeking the thrill, which is why he like chose Mary, because she kind of fits the pattern of him being also this kind of thrill seeker, similar to Sherlock, what we also see in this episode. But I wish they included like him actually being like a military man a bit more. And I think the series does that more than many other adaptations do. But it would be interesting to sort of come back to it, especially from like a modern standpoint, where you could have the psychological analysis, where you could have Watson properly talking to a therapist, which again they hint at in this episode, but then the therapist doesn't really make another appearance until like later episodes, and it's only like a very minor thing. So, but in general, I think Watson's characterization in this episode is very strong. I like that he's the secondary main character anyway, but as we know as the series goes on that the focus like shifts very heavily onto Sherlock in later episodes, which I can kind of understand you want to do, but then they sort of forget about Watson. And I think Watson is an interesting character, and especially like in this episode, he gets a lot of interesting stuff to do. I absolutely love this conversation he has going on with Mycroft, even though Mycroft is completely useless in this episode. But I like that during this conversation, we see exactly what kind of man Watson is. Like, he's put into this dangerous situation, but while he's a bit on edge, he's calm. He's had this kind of experience before, and he's not shy to say, yeah, no, I'm not doing what you tell me to do, because screw that, I'm doing my own thing. I like that you here already see this glimpse of that he's a brave military man with experience, but that he's also loyal to Sherlock, where this loyalty to him already sort of begins, that he not only is a good friend you can rely on, that he's loyal, but that he just has very strong principles, especially moral principles. And he's like, I'm not just doing this because he's my friend, because they barely know each other at this point, but he's just like, on principle, I think this is wrong, which is why I'm not doing this. And I love that whole conversation he has with Mycroft. It mainly showcases what kind of person Watson is going to be for this kind of adaptation. And I like that they show him to be vulnerable in the first sort of half of this episode. We see him having hints of PTSD, that he's worried about returning to civilian life and how he's going to adjust to it. He's not quite sure how he's going to do it, or if he'll be able to do it. Finding friends, and all of that. I like that we get to see Watson being kind of vulnerable, but at the same time, he is also a bit scared of being vulnerable. And he has a hard time admitting that a part of him sort of misses this thrill of war which is what they play with in this episode and also in later episodes. And I like that with the help of Sherlock, he sort of manages to come through and realize what he actually wants from life, and that Sherlock actually can give him the sort of satisfaction he seeks for, that he maybe himself didn't even realize he had as this episode begins. And I like that the episode takes its time to focus on Watson, and Watson becomes, as he often is, also in the books, the surrogate character. Like he's the audience's surrogate character. He's the one who we experience the story through. He's the one through who we are introduced to Sherlock naturally in the books, which actually doesn't really happen in this. But similar to him, we like experience Sherlock through him for the first time. Watson very much asks the same question that we have, like who is Sherlock Holmes? What does he actually do for a living? And wow, you're weird, but tell me more, and that kind of thing. And I like how they managed to balance this out. That Watson, on the one hand, is very much this audience surrogate character who has to ask the questions, who's there to like get the clues and write the story, well, at least in the book, and show us what's actually going on by having conversations with Sherlock and also the other characters. But at the same time, they don't want to be a proper character. He is not just the storyteller as he is in the books. He actually has like a whole lot more going on, which is why I think this is a strong start to sort of introduce him to us as he's just come home from Afghanistan and he's having nightmares about war, and you immediately kind of click with that, and you immediately get a feeling for who this character is going to be and what he's going through right now at this moment, especially emotionally speaking, that you're immediately able to connect with him. And I just adore what they do with Watson. In general, in the show, I think Watson's characterization is very good, very strong, which is something I talked about in my previous video. I think Watson's characterization is something the show got absolutely right, that they give him a lot of character, that he is very much the man from the book, but that he's also so much more, that I let him be his own person. He is actually like his own individual character. Like Watson himself could have an entire show. And this is what you want. Like he's a doctor, he's a military man, he's a human being, and I like that. And his chemistry with Sherlock, I think, immediately works, which is something I also talked about in the previous video, that the chemistry between Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch is just amazing. You have them on screen and it immediately works. You can immediately see, okay, Holmes, Watson, it just works. And I love how Martin Freeman plays this confusion that Watson has about Sherlock. He's like, okay, this guy is weird, but he's also intrigued by him. He's like, okay, but I moved in with him. Clearly I'm comfortable enough to move in with this guy, that he's into what he's doing, that he has this curiosity about it, where he's like, okay, this is someone else. I want to know what he's doing. I don't even quite realize what I'm getting myself into, but he realizes that Sherlock Holmes is someone special. And I think, again, this works very well with like the connection to the audience, and Watson very much becomes this character similar to like the viewer, where we're like, okay, we know there's Sherlock Holmes, we know he's a great man, but we're also kind of put off. We realize he's cool and there's something very special about him, but at the same time we're put off, but we also want to know what his deal is. We want to know how he solves case. We want to know what he actually does and how his whole deduction shtick works. And I think this is perfectly like written into Watson's character, especially in this first episode. And that brings us to the man himself, Sherlock Holmes. So I talked about this previously, that I think Benedict Cumberbatch is spot on casting for Sherlock Holmes, because he looks exactly like you imagine a young Sherlock Holmes to look like. Like, he looks interesting. He has this, because Benedict Cumberbatch isn't conventionally handsome. Like he is handsome, but he's not conventionally handsome. He's kind of, I don't want to say weird looking, but he's interesting looking. And I think that's perfect for Sherlock Holmes. Like, he has the cheekbones, he has a bit of a high forehead, which is like covered up by his hair. I think that works wonderfully for young Sherlock Holmes, just like visually speaking. And I like that it went with like the younger casting, because if you think about Sherlock Holmes, the character, in the very first story, which takes place in 1881, Sherlock Holmes is 27 years old. Like, if we go by Sherlock being born in the year 1854, he's 27 years old. He's young. And Watson is maybe just like a couple of years older than him, early 30s, maybe mid-30s. And I think that works brilliantly. I think how old was Benedict Cumberbatch when they did this? I think like in his early 30s or something like that. And I think that's great. That's exactly what you go with, especially if you have a series that goes on for a couple of episodes. You introduce Sherlock as a younger man, because he is introduced as a younger man, and then you can have him be older, because the characters don't change very much. So just go with him being young and then have him become older as the series goes on. Perfect. And I like how, just aesthetically speaking, his whole character works, that he like wears a suit and a long coat, which is, sort of like the stereotypical kind of outfit for a detective, like long coat. You have to put him in a long coat, because, sort of trench coat, but, close enough. And I like that, he looks very clean, immaculate, but then you see Baker Street, and you see him, nail his mail onto the mantelpiece, and you see how everything is chaotic. Because this is always how I imagine Sherlock Holmes to be. He himself looks very clean, but if you go into Baker Street, it's chaotic. But to Sherlock, the chaos makes sense. It's an organized mess. Sherlock is basically an organized mess. That's what Sherlock Holmes is. And I think they portray this, like, visually speaking, brilliantly in regards to Sherlock's character. Now, Sherlock himself, I've talked about this. Oh, my shirts are just not sitting comfortably today. I've talked about this previously, that I like the Sherlock in this series, I really do, which is also due to the fact that, like I said, Benedict Cumberbatch, fantastic actor, and he just has this charisma that he's able to like make Sherlock, he was a huge wanker in the first couple of episodes, to make him likable and charismatic. Because in the books, he is socially awkward. He is a bit inconsiderate at times and impolite, but he's just socially awkward. But you get along with him. You can see why people are interested in him as a person. And you can see this here as well in A Study in Pink. Even though, like, again, they exaggerate certain characteristics of Sherlock, which I think especially comes to the forefront in the second half of the episode, when we slowly find out who the murderer actually is, and the story deviates from what actually happens in the novel, where Sherlock sets a trap for the cabbie, and they get to the cabbie and they arrest him, and then we get this whole flashback about murderous Mormons, which is really weird. And in this, Sherlock just goes with the cabbie and lets himself get talked into this whole mind game thingy, which would never happen in the original novel. Like, Sherlock would have just called the cops. That's what he does in the original story. He just calls the cops, and Jefferson Hope is arrested. And in this, they mention this towards the end of the episode, that he did this to like prove that he's clever. And I think that's like the main difference. Sherlock in the episode, or in the whole series actually, constantly feels like he needs to prove that he's clever. He constantly needs to show people how smart he is, that he constantly has to show off about his deduction skills, about what he knows. And I'm not saying that the original Sherlock isn't a show-off. He is a bit of a show-off, he definitely is. But the Sherlock in the books, he doesn't need to prove that he's smart. Sherlock in the books knows that he's the smartest person in the room, and everyone else knows that he's the smartest person in the room. He never needs to prove that. He likes to show off. He likes to say, okay, let's have a bit of fun with deductions, because why not? But it's never really it's never too condescending. It sometimes can, but it's never too condescending like it is in the BBC series. And I think this is where you already get like first hints of the characterization for the Sherlock Holmes character in this series being ever so slightly off, where they take characteristics of the original Sherlock Holmes and either like completely twist them so it works for their story, or that they completely exaggerate them. And at the time, I was fine with that, because at the time I wasn't too familiar yet with all of the stories. And when I watched this for the first time, like I said, 13 years old, I was really into it. I was totally into this version of Sherlock Holmes as a character, and I could totally buy when like Sergeant Donovan says that Sherlock gets off on this, and that he would put a body there to press it and be able to like deduce the whole thing, even though he was the one who put the body there. Which you could see the BBC Sherlock kind of doing, but would never happen with the original Sherlock Holmes just would never happen. Like this whole line about I'm not a psychopath, I'm a high-functioning sociopath. You could never apply, I don't think you could apply that to the original Sherlock Holmes at all. Again, Sherlock Holmes, socially awkward, bit of a weirdo, but that's it. In the original story, you would never question Sherlock, Sherlock's like moral integrity or anything like that. Like, in fact, in some of the stories, like Sherlock lets the bad guy go because he feels bad about what happened to them. So I'm not quite sure the BBC Sherlock would do that. Maybe in one of the later episodes, not sure. But the Sherlock in the BBC version is, they make him, I don't want to say edgy. Edgy is such a stupid word. But they kind of make him a bit more edgy. They're trying to him more of like a grey character morals-wise. And they give him a bit more of a dark edge, so to speak, with like Sergeant Donovan and Anderson being like, oh, he's the weirdo, he's psycho, he's into this. And he like would kill someone to prove how smart he is. And they do play with that, but like we get moments where, for example, when Sherlock finds the suitcase, the pink suitcase, and Watson for a second is like, why does he have the suitcase? Did he kill that lady? And Sherlock is like, well, sometimes people do think I might be the murderer. Which again is something that would never happen in the original stories, but with this Sherlock you're thinking, yeah, maybe, because maybe they're trying to be like, okay, he's still a bit younger, he's still trying to get his footing, he's definitely a thrill seeker. The Sherlock in this is a hardcore thrill seeker. Both Watson and Holmes are thrill seekers in this, which I'm not quite sure is always the right thing, because, I mean, if you think about Sherlock, like, retires in his own age and is just, like, content with caring for bees in Sussex, and Watson, like, gets married and he's cool with that and being a practicing doctor and all that. And I kind of see how they want to play that with Watson, because, you know, in the stories, Watson always finds some kind of excuse that he's like, oh, I have to leave my office, I have to leave my wife to be with Sherlock Holmes or something like that. But, you know, that's just storytelling. That's just storytelling. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the Sherlock Holmes stories. So you have to sort of give Watson excuses for that. But with Sherlock, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I mean, sure, we get this whole shtick with Sherlock being bored and he constantly needs to sort of something that he can occupy his mind with. But it's never to this level of that he is... Because you could argue that Sherlock in the BBC version is almost... I'm not quite sure if self-destructive is the right word, but that he very knowingly puts himself in, like, deadly, fatal danger, where he very well knows that he could die, just so he can either prove that he's the smallest person in the room, or just for the heck of it, because he wants the thrill. Which maybe is sort of a surrogate for his drug habit that briefly gets hinted at in this, that he, instead of being able to take drugs, he does this to get a kick. Which is, again, like a bit of a change. It's an extreme change. It's a more modern change. I think it's a very 2010s approach to the Sherlock Holmes character, definitely. That he's this kind of exotic man who's dangerous, and we know that he does stuff he shouldn't do, but we're into it regardless, and we want to know why he is like this. It doesn't drift into like the characteristics of like the bad boy character, because that would be, God, could you imagine? It doesn't quite become that. Thank God it doesn't. But they definitely try to make Sherlock. I'm just gonna say they try to make Sherlock more edgy in this, and I think in a certain way it kind of works, and it does make Sherlock quite interesting. But I can see how you might have problems with that, especially if you compare him to the Sherlock Holmes from the original novels, how that works. But I think, like, as a character, just for the BBC version, if you separate him from the original character, I think the Sherlock Holmes in the BBC version is very interesting. And I think he has a lot of potential that they already hint at in this episode. Like they hint at him having had a drug problem at some point, that he is this thrill seeker who puts himself in mortal danger even though he knows he shouldn't do that. But that there is a hint of him actually caring about people, like we see with Watson. And there is a hint of being more to Sherlock than meets the eye. And there's definitely also a hint of being more to Watson's character. And I think there's a good ground basis for like the whole Sherlock and John dynamic in this very first episode, which I think they work well with in the next couple of episodes, which I know gets completely blown out of proportion, becomes super weird in series 3 and 4, where they focus way too much on Sherlock's character and how fantastic and almost godlike he is and all of that. But I think for like a first episode, it works well, and I can. It definitely got me super interested back in the day, and I think you can work with this version of Sherlock Holmes. In regards to like the setting and the visuals and the story, I think this is a solid adaptation of A Study in Stalk. They run with basically almost everything that happens in the original novel. They just can naturally they have to like sort of minimize it a little bit, like Watson coming home, then he actually lives with Sherlock for like a couple of days or weeks, where he like tries to figure out what it actually is that Sherlock does for a living, where we get this wonderful list of skills that Watson makes for Sherlock, which is actually quite a lot of fun to read. And then him actually seeing that occasionally Lestrade comes in, but he's not, at that point he doesn't even really know yet that it's Lestrade. Then he just sort of gets kind of caught up in this investigation because Sherlock invites him along, and he's like, yeah, sure, I want to know what you do. And I love how they take like little portions of the story, of the original story, and they put it together into this 90-minute episode. For example, when they get to Baker Street for the first time, and Watson is like, I read your website, like this whole deduction stuff is nonsense, and Sherlock is trying to be like, well, it actually isn't, it's actually quite smart. Like, this is something that happens in the original story, where Watson reads an article in the newspaper, and he's like, well, this is absolute rubbish. And Sherlock's like, I'm actually the person who wrote that article about deducing things. And I like how they just take bits like that from the original story and then are able to sort of include it in a minimized or changed way into this episode, where it's interesting enough for people who don't know the original stories, but it's even more interesting for people who have actually read the story, who are like, oh cool, there's actually kind of like this scene. And so I think they make a good job in this first episode to show that this episode perfectly works for people who have never read a Sherlock Holmes story, who are only familiar with the characters. But it also very much works for people who have read the stories, that there are enough little tidbits for people to be like, oh, I actually recognize this from A Study in Scarlet or from one of the other short stories, that they put this in there, and that you get enough hints for people who have read the stories to always find like an Easter egg. There's only really like two things that completely distract from the main story or are different to the original Study in Scarlet story, which I already mentioned. One being the whole Mycroft thing that happens, which is basically in there because the original pilot episode was 60 minutes long and didn't have Mycroft in it. And the BBC was like, yeah, cool, we'll take the show, but can you make the episodes 90 minutes long? And they were like, okay, so they wrote this whole Mycroft thing in there. And I like Mark Gatiss' Mycroft, even though the Mycroft in BBC Sherlock is not really like how I imagine Mycroft to be in the books. And he's fine, he's a fantastic actor. But especially in this episode, Mycroft has no point of being there. He's literally just there to be like, ooh, maybe he's Moriarty, and then no, it's just Mycroft. Like, he has no connection to the main story at all. You could cut out this entire thing with Mycroft and John, and the story would not change in this episode. So if they really had to include him somehow into this episode, they should have made it make more sense that he's actually connected to what's going on with the mystery or with the characters, that to a degree where you have to have this conversation, otherwise the story wouldn't happen that way, or something like that. Because he's literally just there to be sort of frightening and weird and vaguely evil. So the audience can be like, oh, arch enemy, so that's probably Moriarty, even though we know it isn't. And that's definitely something I could have written in a better way that made more sense. And the second thing is, I already mentioned it, Sherlock going with the cabbie at the end of the episode, which did not happen in the original story. It would not happen, because the Sherlock in the books wouldn't do that. This is like, again, where the story deviates. And I think in the pilot, it's originally happens that the cabbie actually takes Sherlock. The cabbie drugs Sherlock in the pilot and takes him to Baker Street and then plays his whole not quite sure if it forces him to play this mind game with him and the pills, which I think in hindsight made a lot more sense than what happens in the finished version. Which I guess is due to the fact that the BBC said, okay, yeah, cool, but let's make it 90 minutes long, so they had to change it around a bit. But I don't know, maybe they could have somehow worked it out how they did it in the pilot, but nah, I guess that didn't really work. Nevertheless, I think the case works rather well for this first episode. Like I said, they adapt most of the things from the original canon. Naturally, they can't really do the original story motivation, because it's murderous Mormons in the original story, so you can't really do that. But I think it still was a mistake. I also mentioned this previously, to have it be connected to Moriarty, because why introduce Moriarty this early? They could have just have Jefferson Hope still revenge his girlfriend like it was in the original story. Just don't let it be murderous Mormons. Just let it be some I don't know, some weird shady government organization. I don't know, something like that. But no, had to be Moriarty, which didn't really make sense, if you ask me. How does that just work, economy-wise, business-wise, to sponsor killing? I don't know how that works. It's kind of stupid. But I still think, if you remove it from the original story, I think it's not perfect. It's by no means perfect, but it does the job it's out to do, and it gets you interested into the characters, which I think is the most important thing. Well, it's the main focus, that it gets you into these characters. You're here for the Holmes-Watson dynamic, and you'll be okay, cool, Sherlock Holmes is a socially awkward detective. I kind of want to know why he is like that, and you think Watson is kind of the relatable character, but he's also got his own dark demons going on, and you want to see how these two work things out together. And that's what the episode does pretty well, I think. Also, visually speaking, I still think the show to this day set a visual standard for what television looked like. This whole thing with having the text appear on screen. Sherlock, BBC Sherlock started doing that, and it set a trend for other TV and also movie productions that then kept that idea and kept doing that. Because it's smart. It's a smart way of letting the audience know what's going on with what Sherlock is Googling, for example, what he's looking up, or what he sees when we see the clues depicted on screen. We see what Sherlock actually thinks. And that works so well because you can follow Sherlock's thought process, and you can follow what people are doing, because it is a visual medium. It's a TV show, so that it would make sense to put texts and stuff like that from your phone or from your laptop on screen. It works. And I know people started making fun of it down the road, with it being the shtick that Sherlock, the BBC Sherlock series has, with the text and all the fancy deduction visuals and all that, which granted got kind of blown out of proportions in later episode, where they totally focus on style over substance. But I think in this first episode, especially the deductions together with the visuals, work really well. This whole deduction scene with Sherlock seeing the lady in pink for the first time, and we see him inspect her body, and we see him, okay, the coat is still wet, but the umbrella is still dry. We see the dirt on her leg, but there's no suitcase, a wedding ring and all that. The hints get shown to us. We see the clues. And we see what Sherlock thinks as he sees these clues, and he's okay, wet, dry, clean, no. And the audience can follow this. They can follow what Sherlock is doing. And then if you were to pause it, you would have the time to think about the clues for yourself and think about, okay, what could that actually mean? And then the show proceeds to actually explain this to you, in classic Sherlock Holmes fashion. They give you the hints, And then Sherlock makes the deduction, and you're like, how did he do that? And then he proceeds to explain it via the evidence you've just seen yourself. And I think that works wonderfully in this first episode. I've mentioned this previously, that in future episodes down the road in this series, they don't really do that anymore. That it's really more like style over substance, where Sherlock pulls out deductions out of the magic hat that make no sense, or that where you had no evidence for as the audience. But I think in this first episode it works really, really well. Or we get this whole deduction with Watson's phone, which I know has been made fun of as well, like with where the charger is connected. If you have scratches there, you were drunk, and everyone's sort of got scared of checking their phone and being like, oh no, people are going to think I'm a drunk. And I mean, this is basically like a deduction from a short story or from one of the novels where Sherlock do something from like a pocket watch, but they just basically change it so it suits the phone in modern days. And I think that's wonderful. It's a neat little change. But I mean, even the Sherlock in the original stories came to conclusions sometimes out of nowhere, where you're like, okay, yeah, I can kind of see how you would think that, but there are hundreds of other conclusions you could draw from that one clue. Every Sherlock Holmes fan knows that. We know that the deductions are sometimes completely ridiculous, and where we're thinking, how would you? It could just might as well just be that, and Sherlock is so sure that it's this, and then turns out to be this, even though it could just as well be that other thing. We know that. We all know that, but that's the Sherlock Holmes shtick. That's what we're here for. That's why we watch and read Sherlock Holmes. We know that it's sometimes a bit ridiculous, the whole deduction thing, but that's what we're here for, and the show just runs with it. Okay, I don't even think I can say that much more. I do like this first episode a lot. It's one of my favorite episodes within the series. I think, like I've mentioned, it's the episode I've watched the most, obviously, because I just think it's a brilliant introductory episode, especially like to these characters. As a fan of the canon, I can totally see why there are things here where you're like, this doesn't really work for me. But I think, like looking back, watching this as someone who at the time had only a limited knowledge of the canon of the original characters, who just was simply looking for like a cool, interesting Sherlock Holmes adaptation. This completely worked. This, like, I was hooked, and I just really wanted to know what else they were going to do with the series. And I don't know. I know that it's become a bit of a thing to make fun of BBC Sherlock, and I know that the show has its faults. I know that it's by no means perfect, definitely. Like down the line, the later episodes, absolute bonkers. But as far as it goes, like for this very just first episode, only studying Pink, I think this is a solid Sherlock Holmes adaptation. It has its faults, but it does most things pretty well, I think. Especially in regards to the characterization, especially in regards to Watson, I think. And the acting is fantastic. Casting is absolutely perfect, I think, for both Holmes and Watson. And you can definitely see the strength of these characters and of these actors in this first episode. And it gets you interested enough that you want to see how they go on solving cases together, because you want to see, okay, who's Moriarty? What other cases does Sherlock get himself into? How's Mycroft maybe going to come back? And just how are these two going to hang out now that they live together? So in that regard, I think Studying Pink does a solid job at introducing you to like the Sherlock Holmes canon. So this is it for this Baker Street review. As always, do tell me down in the comments below what your thoughts are on this episode. You can tell me your thoughts about this episode, but you can also just talk about BBC Sherlock in general. Have you recently seen it? Like, what are your thoughts on it as a Sherlock Holmes adaptation? Did you like it when it came out, or were you kind of weary about it? Would you like me also to review the other episodes as well? Naturally, I'm definitely going to come back to the whole series at some point anyway. I definitely want to do like a whole series analysis at some point. Maybe do some video essays on like series 1, series 2 and so on. But if you want some Baker Street reviews on the other episodes, do let me know down in the comments below. I always love coming back to BBC Sherlock, and if you want me to comment on some of the other episodes, I can absolutely do that. And naturally, if there are any suggestions for further Baker Street reviews, don't hesitate to tell me about them. Can be TV shows, movies, books, video games, whatever it is, I'm gonna take a look at it. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done already. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see all of you next time. Goodbye.